In the winter of 1847 came to Ashenmoor the way old grief returns, quietly, without announcement, and with the full intention of staying. The estate sat on the edge of the Scottish lowlands, where the land could not quite decide if it was moor or meadow, and had settled into something between the two, wide, restless, and beautiful in a way that asked nothing of you. The house itself was built of dark stone and old certainty. Nay, it had belonged to the Calvert family for 4 generations, and it wore that fact the way old men wear their age. Not proudly, exactly, but with a kind of settled permanence that made you feel the world had been arranged around it, and not the other way around. The Earl of Ashenmoor, one Lord Dorian Calvert, was 34 years old and not accustomed to being surprised by anything. He had inherited the title at 26, too young and too unready, and the years since had carved him into something that people in the county described as distinguished, and people who knew him better described as unreachable. He was not unkind. He was simply elsewhere, in a way that was very quiet and very complete. His wife had died in the 3rd year of their marriage, leaving him a widower and leaving the estate without an heir, and he had responded to both losses. By becoming a man who managed things, he managed the estate with precision. He managed his grief with silence. He managed the people around him with a courteous, impenetrable distance that no one had yet found a way through. His one true indulgence, the thing people spoke of in the way they spoke of eccentricities in men of rank, with a mixture of indulgence and mild bewilderment, was the horse. Her name was Sable, and she was wrong about almost everything a horse should be. She was too large for a lady's mount and too temperamental for a working horse. Her coat was the color of a winter sky just before dark, a deep blue-black that shifted in certain lights into something almost violet. To play, she had been brought over from Ireland by a dealer who had charged an obscene price and considered himself charitable for not charging more. 3 of Lord Calvert's best groomsmen had attempted to work with her in the first month. One had required a fortnight of rest afterward. She was not vicious exactly. She was sovereign. She operated according to an interior logic that no one had yet deciphered, and she extended to the Earl himself only a grudging, conditional tolerance that he had earned through 3 months of patience, and what his head groom, a man of 40 years' experience, named Petrie, called the most stubborn persistence he had ever seen in a gentleman. No one else went near her. Sable had made this plain in ways that required no translation. True it was into this house in November that Miss Wren Somersdale arrived. She came by hired cart from the village, which was the first thing Petrie noted and the first thing he did not say to anyone. A companion or secretary arriving by hired cart meant money of a particular kind, the kind that had recently become much less than it once was. She had 1 trunk and a canvas bag that she carried herself, declining the stable boy's offer to take it with a small, firm shake of her head that suggested she was accustomed to carrying her own things and had made her peace with it. She was 26, and gay. She had the kind of face that required a second look before you understood it, not immediately arresting, but precise and clear, with grey eyes that gave very little away and a quality of stillness that made her seem, in any room, like the most composed person in it. She wore a dress of dark wool, neatly kept but not new, and her hair was the color of pale amber, pinned back without ornament. She looked like someone who had decided some years ago that appearances were information to be managed, and had been managing them carefully ever since. Her name, before the reversal of her family's fortunes, had been considerably more prominent in the county than it was now. Her father, Sir Aldous Somersdale. No, the file had that name. She had been born Ren Aldoris. No, T. She was the daughter of a man who had once held land in the next county, and lost it in the way that land was lost in those years. Through a combination of bad investments, a dishonest solicitor, and the particular vulnerability of a trusting man operating in an untrustworthy world. Her father had died 2 years before her arrival at Ashenmoor, leaving her with a small legacy, a large quantity of good manners, and no particularly viable options. She had taken the position of secretary companion to the estate's business affairs, because Lord Calvert's solicitor in Edinburgh, a man named Grantham, who had known her father and remembered the family, had written to her. He had framed it delicately, a position of some responsibility for a woman of your background and capabilities, and she had read between those careful lines with ease. The Earl needed someone who could be trusted with accounts and correspondence. She needed employment that would not require her to pretend she was something she was not. It had seemed a reasonable arrangement. She did not expect to remain more than a year. The Earl received her in his study on the afternoon of her arrival. He was standing at the window when she entered, and he turned with the measured and hurried movement of a man who had never been required to rush for anyone. He assessed her in one brief, comprehensive glance, the kind of look that took in information without appearing to. And then he nodded. "Miss Sommerdale." "My lord, you come recommended by Grantham, who has not recommended anyone to me in 11 years, and whose judgment I have found in 11 years to be reliable." "I am glad of it," she said. He studied her for a moment. She held his gaze without effort, and something in that, the absence of the slight downward flicker that most people produced under his direct attention, seemed to register. The estate accounts are 3 months behind. My previous secretary departed in August under circumstances I will not detail, except to say that his arithmetic was creative in ways that benefited primarily himself. You will begin with the ledgers from January. I would like a preliminary assessment by the end of the fortnight. Yes, my lord. The house runs on a schedule that Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, will explain to you. I ask only that you not disrupt it. I am not a difficult man to work for, Miss Somersdale. I ask for accuracy, discretion, and punctuality. I do not ask for conversation. I have none to spare, she said, and he looked at her, a fractional pause, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. Good, he said. That will be all. She curtsied and left. She was aware, walking down the corridor toward the rooms Mrs. Finch had assigned her, that she had been assessed and provisionally approved. To me. She was also aware that the Earl of Ashenmoor had not looked at her, in any of that, as if she were a person. He had looked at her the way he had probably looked at her letter of reference, as a document to be evaluated for usefulness. She understood this. She had been a document before. It did not trouble her in the ways it might have troubled someone else. She found the ledgers in a state that confirmed everything the Earl had implied, and a few things he had not. She said nothing about this. She simply worked. She rose before the household, lit her own lamp, and was at the desk in the estate office by 6:30 each morning. She worked with the methodical, unsentimental focus of someone who had learned, through necessity, that good work was the only reliable currency she had. By the end of the first week, she had identified not only the discrepancies, but the mechanism of them. A small, patient fraud that had been running for 14 months and was built to look, at first glance, like clerical error. She wrote out her findings in clear, unadorned prose and left them on the Earl's desk. He read them in silence. The following morning, he came to the estate office. An unusual thing, she understood from Mrs. Finch's expression, and stood in the doorway. "Found it," he said. "It was there to be found. My solicitor in Edinburgh missed it." "Your solicitor in Edinburgh was looking at it from the outside," she said. "Looked at it from the inside." He was quiet for a moment. "This is good work." "Yes," she said. "It was not arrogance. It was simply agreement with an accurate statement, and he seemed to recognize it as such." He left without another word. It was Mrs. Finch who first mentioned the horse. It won. She brought it up one evening at the end of Wren's second week, in the kitchen, where Wren sometimes took her supper when the hour was late, and the formal dining room felt excessive for one person. Mrs. Finch was a woman of 60, with a weathered, capable face, and the particular warmth of someone who had spent 40 years taking care of a house and the people in it. Happy. "You'll hear her in the night sometimes," Mrs. Finch said, setting down a plate of cold mutton and bread. "Don't be alarmed. She's in the north paddock, the mare." "The black one," Wren said. She had seen the horse from the window of the office, a dark shape moving against the grey of the field. "Sable," Mrs. Finch confirmed, and something in the way she said the name, not fear exactly, but a careful respect, made Wren look up. "She's a difficult animal. She's a particular animal," Mrs. Finch said, in the tone of someone who had chosen that word after considering several less charitable alternatives. "She says she's the finest horse on the estate. His lordship says the same. But she'll not be managed by anyone. 3 men tried. She let his lordship near her eventually, but she's not easy even with him." She paused. "The men in the stables have their theories about her. I have mine. Which is that some creatures know when they're in the wrong place and make their feelings plain." Wren said nothing to this. She finished her supper and went upstairs to sleep. But 3 days later, crossing the east yard in the early morning frost to retrieve a set of deed documents from the records room, she walked past the gate of the north paddock. Sable was there. The horse was standing at the far end of the field, motionless in the cold morning light, her breath making small clouds in the air. She was extraordinary in the way that certain things are extraordinary. Not decorative, not designed for admiration, but real in a way that demanded acknowledgement. Wren stopped walking. She did not know why exactly, except that the horse had turned its head and was looking at her with a directness that felt, absurdly, like recognition. Wren had grown up near horses. Her father had kept 3 at their estate in the better years, and she had ridden before she could read with full comprehension. She had not been near one in 4 years. She did not approach the fence. She simply stood. Sable watched her. For a long moment, the horse took 3 steps forward. Not quickly, not with any drama, just 3 deliberate steps that halved the distance between them. Wren did not move. A feeling came over her that she could not have named precisely. Something old and physical, lodged below the level of words, recognition that lived in her hands and her chest and had been sleeping for 4 years. She hummed, very softly, without deciding to. It was a fragment of something her father had sung in the stables when she was a child, a low, unhurried melody with no particular tune, the kind of sound a person makes when they are trying to say, I mean, you no harm in a language that does not require words. Sable stood still. Her ears, which had been angled back, shifted forward, and Wren became aware, slowly, that she was not alone. Lord Calvert was standing in the shadow of the records room, doorway perhaps 10 feet behind her. She did not know how long he had been there. She turned, with a composure she had to work slightly harder for than usual, and found him watching her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the contained, evaluating look of the study. Something less managed, something that asked a question he had not yet decided to voice. I apologize, she said. I was crossing to the records room. I know where you were going, he said. His eyes moved from her to the horse and back, forward. 3 steps, Wren said. It may mean nothing. Petrie will tell you it means everything. He was quiet for a moment. What was that you were humming? She hesitated. An old stable song. My father used it. Your father kept horses? He did before. She let the word settle, with its implication of a dividing line between before and after that. He was too intelligent not to understand. He looked at her for a long moment, with the grey eyes that she had come to understand were not cold exactly, but full of things that had no outlet. Come to the paddock tomorrow morning, if you are willing. It was not an order. She recognized the difference. Yes, my lord, she said. He nodded and went back inside. She stood there a moment longer, the cold air sharp in her lungs. Sable had not moved. The horse was watching her still, with that unaccountable steadiness, and Wren felt, with a precision that surprised her, that she had not been looked at so directly by any living creature in a very long time. She went to collect the deeds. The mornings at the paddock became a ritual before either of them acknowledged it as such. It began with caution on all sides. Wren at the fence, the Earl a few feet back, Sable a cautious distance within it. Over the course of the first week, the distances compressed. The horse came to the fence on the 3rd morning. On the 5th, she allowed Wren to rest a hand on the top rail while she stood close enough to breathe on it. On the 7th, Sable lowered her great head and pressed her nose once, briefly, against Wren's sleeve, and the Earl, standing to Wren's left, said nothing for a full minute, and then said, quietly, Petrie will not believe me when I tell him. Then perhaps don't tell him, Wren said. And Lord Calvert looked at her with something that, in a less contained man, she might have called startled. You have a dry way about you, Miss Somersdale, he said. I have found it useful, she said, stood in silence as the dawn light came across the low hills. It was the kind of silence that, between strangers, is uncomfortable, and between 2 people who have been paying attention to each other is something else entirely. He began to talk, in those mornings, in the way that people talk when they have found, unexpectedly, that they are not required to be careful. Not about himself, not directly. He spoke about the estate, the history of certain fields, the character of particular tenants, the problem of the southern drainage that had occupied 3 generations of Calverts and remained defiantly unsolved. He spoke about the Mare, about the patience required to earn a suspicious creature's trust. He did not speak about his wife. He did not speak about his grief. But she heard both in the careful shape of the things he left unsaid. She listened, itchly. She had always been better at listening than most people gave her credit for. She offered, in turn, small things. An observation about the morning light on the hills, A thought about the drainage problem that turned out, when she looked at the records, to have a solution his grandfather had attempted and abandoned in 1803, for reasons that no longer applied. For Métis, he received these things with the focus of someone who had been used to information arriving fully processed and was encountering, with some surprise, the experience of thinking something through with another person. He did not ask about her past. She was grateful for this, in the complicated way you are grateful for something that both protects and withholds. In the house, the situation was harder. Lord Calvert had a cousin, a distant one, of the particular variety that manages to feel both intrusive and inescapable. His name was Mr. Bernard Aldrin, and he had been visiting Ashenmoor for 6 weeks when Wren arrived and showed no particular intention of leaving. He was not a bad man in the way that villains are bad. He was bad in the way that weak men are bad, which is to say through self-interest, dressed up as principle, and fear dressed up as concern. It had noted the change in the Earl's mornings. Immediately, he presented his concerns to Lord Calvert in the library 3 weeks after the paddock mornings had begun, with the air of a man performing a great service. "I say it only out of regard for your reputation," Bernard said. He was a handsome man in the way that requires maintenance and knows it. A secretary is one thing, but the familiarity of the situation, the morning hours, the private conversations, it has been remarked upon. "By whom?" the Earl said, without looking up from the correspondence on his desk. "By several people." Bernard had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable at this. "I am concerned that the woman may be taking advantage of a position of trust. One knows so little about her, after all. The Somerdales were a decent family. But they are reduced, and reduced people have sometimes—" "Bernard," the Earl said, and something in his voice brought Bernard to a stop with the efficiency of a door closing. Miss Somerdale recovered 14 months of fraudulent accounting in her first fortnight here, saving this estate a sum that I will not discuss with you, Esquire. She has reorganized the tenancy records, solved the southern drainage problem, and provided me with more useful counsel in 6 weeks than I have received in the preceding 2 years. He looked up. She does not come to Ashenmoor to take anything. She comes to do her work. I would suggest that the confusion is yours. If Bernard left the library, looking like a man who had meant to deliver a blow and had received one instead. He did not go quietly, did he? 2 weeks later, Wren arrived at the estate office in the morning to find the door already open. A set of household accounts, the household accounts, not the estate accounts, which were her domain, had been moved to her desk. Among them, tucked with seeming carelessness between 2 pages of kitchen expenditure, it was an invoice for a piece of jewelry purchased from an Edinburgh shop. It bore the Earl's name and a date from the previous autumn. It was not there because it had been misfiled. She understood this in the first 3 seconds, and spent the following 30 considering what she was looking at and what it had been put there to accomplish. So then she set it aside without comment and did her work. That afternoon, Bernard appeared in the doorway of the office with Lady Ashworth, the Earl's aunt, a woman of 70 who had authority in the household that came from nothing less than longevity and the force of an opinion that had never been successfully contradicted. There seemed to have been a confusion with the household accounts, Bernard said, his tone perfectly calibrated to suggest that the confusion was not his. Lady Ashworth looked at Wren with the sharp, undeceived eyes of someone who has been watching people for 70 years and has a comprehensive catalogue of what they do when they are frightened. The accounts are not confused, Mare said. They are exactly as they were, with the addition of a document that does not belong here. She picked up the invoice and placed it on the corner of the desk, distinct from the accounts. This was placed among the records this morning. It is not estate correspondence. I have not filed it. It should be returned to wherever it came from. Bernard's expression did something complicated. Are you suggesting someone placed it there deliberately? He said, with an air of reasonable incredulity. I am stating that it is there and that it does not belong there, Wren said. The inference is yours to draw. Well, Lady Ashworth looked from Bernard to Wren and back again with an expression that revealed exactly nothing. I will have a word with my nephew, she said. It was not entirely clear which development she intended to report. She left. Bernard, without a remaining move, followed her. Wren sat very still for a moment after they were gone. She felt something she recognized from the years of her father's decline. The particular feeling of standing on ground that you know is solid, and holding that knowledge against the pressure of people who would very much prefer you did not. She did not go to the Earl. She did not have to. Lady Ashworth went to him instead. That evening, and whatever she said. She was not a woman who required many words when she had decided on the substance of them. It had the quality of information, delivered cleanly and received without intermediary. The following morning, Bernard Aldrin departed Ashenmoor with the particular efficiency of a man who has been given no reasonable choice. He said his goodbyes to the household with excellent manners and a brightness that did not reach his eyes. Wren watched him go from the window of the estate office without satisfaction. She felt, instead, something tired and careful, the feeling of a threat having passed, which is not the same as the feeling of safety. The Earl came into the office an hour later. He stood in the doorway. He had a way of doing this, she had noticed, of arriving at a threshold and pausing, as though the question of how to enter a room deserved consideration, and looked at her. Lady Ashworth told me what happened. I dealt with it, she said. I know you did. He was quiet. The winter light came through the window at a low angle the way it did in November, making the room feel both smaller and more precise. You did not come to me. It did not require you, she said, simply then. Because it was true, and because she had decided, somewhere in the course of the previous 2 years, to say true things when they were relevant. And I have learned to be careful about requiring things from people who have not offered them. He looked at her for a long moment. The grey eyes held something she had not seen before. Not the careful management of a man arranging his own expression, but something unmanaged, something that had simply arrived and was not being sent back. That is a particular kind of loneliness, he said. Yes, she said. It is. The silence that followed was different from the silences in the paddock, which had the open air in them, and the movement of the horse, and the easy alibi of the natural world. This was the silence of a closed room, and 2 people who had run out of the comfortable kinds of indirection. My father's solicitor in Edinburgh, he said finally, the one who wrote to you about this position. His name is Grantham. Yes, my father. He wrote to me as well when your father died. He told me about the family. A pause. He told me what happened to the estate in the next county. Told me what was done to your father by the men who advised him. She was still. He did not tell me that he had written to you. No, I asked him not to. He moved from the doorway into the room, which he had not done before when she was working. He stopped by the window, his back partly to her, his eyes on the grey fields. Your father's land was bought by the men who destroyed him. The evidence of what they did is in the county records, if you know where to look, and I have had reason to look at county records. He turned. It is not irreversible. The legal mechanisms are difficult and slow, but they exist. I have a solicitor in Edinburgh and another in London, and if you would permit me— Why? She said. It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question, asked in the voice of someone who has learned to ask it. He seemed to expect it. Because it is a wrong that can be corrected, and I have the means to attempt the correction, and because— He stopped. Then, with the care of a man choosing words the way he would choose a route across uncertain ground. Because you came here with one trunk and a bag you would not let anyone else carry, and you have spent 8 weeks being more useful to this estate than anyone who has worked here in 5 years, and it has not occurred to you once to ask for anything in return, and I find that I cannot leave that unanswered. The fire in the grate said something small. Sighed, very faintly. She could hear Sable moving in the paddock. I do not need saving, she said. I know that, he said. I am not offering to save you. I am offering to help you do what you would have done yourself if you had the resources. He paused. There is a difference. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had stood at the fence for 7 mornings and watched a horse trust her, and who had never once used it to imply that he understood her better than she understood herself. Yes, she said, there is. The months that followed were quiet, in the way that the reconstruction of things tends to be quiet, methodical, specific, and conducted without any of the drama that the initial destruction had carried. Lord Calvert's solicitors were set to work on the county records. Letters were written. Documents were retrieved. The process was slow and frequently tedious and required the kind of patience that Wren had in abundance. She remained at Ashenmoor through the winter, and then through the spring, which came late to the lowlands, but came generously when it did. The moors going from grey to green, in what felt like a single wet week, at the hills beyond the north paddock, coming into a hazy purple that made the mornings unbearably beautiful. She did not change how she worked. She rose at the same hour. She kept the same methodical care. Her first act, when the tenant accounts for the spring quarter were finalized, was to arrange it quietly for the repair of a row of tenant cottages on the estate's northeast boundary that had been neglected since the previous autumn, and to do it in a way that the tenants received without obligation or embarrassment. Who had watched her with the skeptical patience of a man who had seen many things at Ashenmoor come and go, stopped her one morning in the yard and said, without preamble, "Cottages?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her with the expressionless assessment of a man who has spent his life reading animals and has applied the same discipline to people. You knew about them. I walked the boundary in February, and the records had not caught up. He nodded once, a nod that contained something she had not received from him before, a specific, considered respect. His lordship's father used to walk the boundary in February, he said. His lordship hasn't done it since he inherited. She said nothing to this. She went back inside, but she thought about it. She thought about the shape of a man whose grief had made him retreat from the things that required him to be present to his own land, his own life, fiction. She thought about how long it was possible to manage things from the inside of a careful distance, before the distance became the thing you were managing, rather than the means by which you managed other things. She thought about what Petrie had not said, which was that the Earl needed someone to remind him that the boundary existed. The mornings at the paddock continued. By March, allowed Wren to groom her, standing with a patience she offered to no one else, her dark eyes half closed in a way that Petrie, upon witnessing it for the first time, responded to with a silence that was, for him, eloquent. In April, Wren rode her. It was not planned. It was one of those things that arrive naturally from a sequence of smaller things, each of which was itself natural, and become inevitable only in retrospect. Sable was saddled for the Earl's morning ride, and he had been detained by an unexpected visitor from the village, and Petrie had gone to fetch something, and Wren was standing in the paddock with the horse who had rested her chin on Wren's shoulder for the past 3 minutes, with the comfortable possessiveness of an animal that has decided. She put her foot in the stirrup. Sable was still. She swung up. The horse stood solid beneath her, enormous and warm, breathing in long, unhurried breaths, and sat for a moment without moving. Then she urged her forward, gently, and Sable walked. Not the tense, watchful gait she had used with the grooms, but an open, reaching walk that said, "I know where I am, and I am willing to be here." They made 2 circuits of the paddock before Lord Calvert returned. He came through the gate and stopped. Had eaten. She pulled Sable up, and they looked at each other. The 3 of them, she supposed, though the horse was engaged in investigating a clump of early grass, and she watched something move through his expression with the slow, significant force of a tide. "Petrie," he said, not looking away from her. Petrie had appeared at the gate, a bridle over one arm. Scorn. "My lord, have you ever seen anyone else ride her?" "No, my lord," Petrie said, and the brevity of it carried the weight of a much longer statement. The Earl looked at Wren. The morning was clear and cold, and the light was the particular clean light of early spring, and she felt, sitting on that horse with her back straight and her hands easy on the reins, more herself than she had felt in 4 years. "You did not tell me your father taught you to ride," Lord Calvert said. "You did not ask," she said, and then, because something about the morning made the careful economy of her words feel suddenly insufficient. "He taught me everything I know about horses. He used to say that a horse could not be deceived, that they responded only to what you actually were, not to what you were trying to appear to be." She paused. "I have found it to be generally true." He was quiet. The horse cropped at the grass with the unconcerned appetite of a creature that has decided the situation does not require her attention. "Your father sounds like a man I would have liked to know," Lord Calvert said. "He was," she said simply. "He was exactly that." The legal proceedings resolved in the late summer with the measured anti-climax that legal proceedings generally produce. A series of documents, a set of signatures, a formal transfer of record. To be. The solicitor in Edinburgh wrote to inform her that the fraudulent sale of her father's land had been successfully contested and that the property was to be restored to her in its original holding, subject to a period of administration. She read the letter twice, sitting in the estate office in the early morning, before anyone else was awake. Then she folded it and sat with it for a while. Lord Calvert found her there when he came down an hour later, which he had been doing since March, arriving at the office before his own day required him, ostensibly to review correspondence. in practice to drink his coffee in a room where the particular quality of the silence suited him. He looked at her face, and then at the letter in her hands, and did not speak immediately, which was one of the many things about him that she had come, without quite deciding to value. "It's done," she said. "Them wrote to me as well," he said. "Last night." She looked at him. "You've known since last night." "Yes, and you didn't come and tell me." "It was your news to receive," he said, "not mine to deliver." She looked at the letter, testamentor. She looked at the window, where the late summer morning was coming in gold across the fields, and she felt the old ache. For her father, for the years that had been taken, and for the girl she had been before she had learned so thoroughly to need nothing, and let it move through her without trying to make it small. "I had intended to leave," she said. "When this was settled, I had not intended to stay beyond the year." "I know," he said. "The estate does not require me," she said. "Not in the same way it did. You have the accounts in order, and the tenancy records current, and the drainage problem resolved." "The estate does not require you," he agreed. "That is accurate." The silence that followed was the kind that requires something to fill it, and makes clear what that something should be. "I find," he said, with the careful precision of a man who has thought about how to say a thing, and is saying it now despite the discomfort of the exposure, "that I have grown accustomed to the particular quality of the mornings here, the light on the hills, the conversations by the paddock fence. He stopped. Then, "You told me once that you had learned to be careful about requiring things from people who had not offered them. I am offering them." Her name, not her title, the first time he had used it, and she felt the shift of it, the same shift she had heard in his voice. When he stopped calling the mare the horse, and started calling her Sable, which was the moment, everyone in the stable knew that the animal had become something other than an acquisition. "I am not asking you to stay because the estate has need of you, though it has. I am asking because I have need of you, which is a thing I have not been able to say about anything or anyone in 8 years, and I find I would like to say it while I still have the clarity to mean it." She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the man who had stood at the boundary fence in February cold and walked the northeast fields with her, not because she had asked him to, but because she had, and she had needed it, and she had found it quietly, and he had seen it, and done it anyway. She looked at the man who had, without announcement or theatre, given her back the thing that had been taken from her, and had done it in a way that left her standing in her own life with her own hands on the outcome. "You are not a man who needs things easily," she said. "No," he said. "I am not. This is not a comfortable thing for you. It is considerably less comfortable than I would prefer," he said. And something in the absolute precision of this, the complete absence of performance in it, made something loosen in her chest that had been held for a long time. "Then yes," she said, "Dorian Itgoon." She said his name the way the name had always been there, waiting for the right occasion. "Yes." They married in October in the small parish church that served the villages on both sides of the low hills, with Petrie and Mrs. Finch among the witnesses and Lady Ashworth in the front pew, looking like a woman whose private opinion has been publicly confirmed. The morning was cold and clear, the hills above the estate carrying the first pale suggestion of frost. Sable lived another 11 years, which was longer than the farrier predicted, and precisely as long as Petrie had privately expected. She was ridden in her later years mostly by the Calvert's daughter, a girl of 10 with her mother's grey eyes and her father's absolute refusal to be hurried, who had grown up in the stable the way her mother had grown up in her father's stable, and who had Sable's confidence in the uncomplicated way of children who have never been told that some things are not for them. On the afternoon of the day Sable died, peacefully, in the north paddock, in the late autumn light. Wren stood at the fence where she had first stood on that November morning 12 years before, and Dorian stood beside her, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "She saw you," he said, finally, "before I did." "She was paying better attention," Wren said. He took her hand, there, at the fence where it had all begun, the cold air settling over the moors and the long grass moving in the last of the afternoon wind. She let herself be held, and the land held them both, and the light that came across the low hills was the particular gold of an October afternoon that knows it will not last and gives itself entirely to the remaining hours.